Roberto Canessa was 19 when Flight 571 slammed into an Andes peak at 12,000 feet. 12 died on impact. 29 survivors trapped in the fuselage with no food, no rescue equipment, temperatures hitting 30 below zero. Search teams would quit after 8 days. The living would face a choice no human should make. 22 more would die before escape. Roberto would face impossible choices to survive. This is one of the greatest survival stories ever told. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Roberto Canessa had never wanted to be on this flight. He'd argued with his mother that morning about the trip, insisting the old Christians rugby team needed him for their exhibition match in Santiago. She'd made him promise to call the moment they landed. Now, watching his teammates board the chartered Fairchild turboprop at Carrasco Airport, he wondered if she'd had some intuition he'd ignored. The team filled the cabin with noise and energy. 19 players, plus their families and friends. 45 people total. Roberto squeezed past Nando Parado, his closest friend on the team, and dropped into a window seat near the tail. Nando followed, grinning as he pulled out a deck of cards. 5 hours to Santiago, Nando said. Plenty of time to win back what you took from me last week. Roberto barely heard him. He was watching the crew load luggage through the window. Captain Julio Ferradas, a veteran Air Force pilot, walked the tarmac doing his pre-flight check. The co-pilot, Dante Laguerra, stood near the nose, studying weather reports. You worried about the flight? Nando asked. The Andes, Roberto said. We're crossing at the worst time of year. October in Uruguay meant spring, but in the high Andes it meant unpredictable storms and winds that could flip an aircraft. Roberto had read about planes disappearing in those mountains, wreckage found years later, if at all. Nando shuffled the cards. Ferradas has flown this route 100 times. We'll be fine. The engine started. Roberto felt the vibration through his seat. Around them, teammates laughed and sang rugby songs. Someone passed around a bottle of wine. Roberto's medical textbook sat unopened in his bag. He was in his second year at university, studying between rugby practices and matches. Most of his teammates were students too. Law, engineering, agriculture. Middle-class kids from Montevideo with their whole lives ahead of them. The plane taxied to the runway. Roberto watched the terminal building slide past his window. His mother would be home by now, probably already worrying despite his promises. He made a mental note to call her first thing when they landed. The Fairchild accelerated. The nose lifted. Montevideo dropped away beneath them, the Rio de la Plata glittering in the afternoon sun. Roberto felt his anxiety ease as they climbed. Maybe Nando was right. Maybe he worried too much. They flew north and west, crossing into Argentina. The landscape below shifted from coastal plains to rolling hills. After an hour, Ferradas announced over the intercom that they'd stop in Mendoza due to weather in the mountains. Nobody complained. It meant an extra night in Argentina, maybe some exploration of the city. The Fairchild touched down in Mendoza at sunset. The team checked into a hotel near the airport. Roberto called his mother from the lobby phone, assuring her everything was fine. They'd cross the Andes tomorrow when conditions improved. She made him promise again to be careful. He didn't know it would be the last time he'd hear her voice for 72 days. October 13th dawned clear in Mendoza. Roberto woke early, restless with anticipation. The team gathered in the hotel restaurant for breakfast, arguing about whether the weather would hold. Through the windows, the Andes rose like a wall to the west, their peaks lost in clouds. Ferradas announced they'd depart at 2 that afternoon. The weather window looked good, not perfect, but acceptable. They'd fly the southern route through Planchon Pass, then descend into Chile. Standard procedure. 2 hours total flight time. Roberto packed his bag slowly. Something felt off, though he couldn't name it. Maybe just nerves. He'd flown before, but never over mountains this high. The Andes stretched 4,000 miles down South America's spine, with peaks reaching over 20,000 feet. Their flight path would take them through passes at 14,000 feet, right at the aircraft's operational ceiling. At the airport, Nando found Roberto standing near the plane, staring up at the mountains. Still worried? Nando asked. Those clouds, Roberto said, pointing west. They're building fast. Ferradas knows what he's doing. Roberto wanted to believe that. He climbed aboard and took the same seat as yesterday. The cabin filled with teammates, their families, friends. 45 people, same as before. The cargo hold carried rugby gear, luggage, a few cases of wine as gifts for their Chilean hosts. The Fairchild took off at 2:18. Roberto pressed his face to the window as they climbed. The city fell away. Brown foothills rose beneath them, then the first real mountains. Snow appeared on the peaks, brilliant white against dark rock. Ferrada's voice crackled over the intercom. We're approaching the Cordillera. Should be smooth flying. The plane entered the pass. Mountains rose on both sides, close enough that Roberto could see individual rocks and snow cornices. The aircraft bounced in turbulence. Not severe, but enough to make people grip their armrests. Then the clouds closed in. White everywhere. The mountains disappeared. Roberto felt the plane climbing, engines straining. Ferradas was trying to get above the weather, but the clouds went higher than they could fly. The turbulence worsened. The Fairchild shuddered and dropped, then climbed again. Someone's bag fell from an overhead compartment. The card game stopped. Nando put the deck away, his usual smile gone. Roberto's medical training kicked in automatically. He noted details. Heart rate elevated, breathing shallow, classic stress response. Around him, others showed the same signs. Pale faces, white knuckles, forced jokes that nobody laughed at. The plane descended. Ferradas must have decided to drop below the clouds, get visual reference again. Roberto felt his ears pop from the pressure change. Lower, lower, still nothing but white outside his window, then a break in the clouds, just for a second. Roberto saw the mountain ridge, dead ahead, close, too close. His brain processed the image in crystalline detail. Black rock, white snow, the ridge stretching across their flight path like a knife edge. They were going to hit it. He opened his mouth to shout a warning that would never matter. The right wing clipped the ridge with a sound like the world ending. The wing tore off. The plane spun right, exposing Roberto's side to the mountain. Metal shrieked. The tail section ripped away, taking 5 people with it into the void. Wind roared through the cabin, instantly dropping the temperature to freezing. Roberto gripped his armrests as the fuselage rolled. Everything became fragments. A woman screaming, someone's shoe flying past his face, the sound of his own voice, though he didn't remember deciding to yell. The left wing hit next, shearing off completely. The fuselage was now just a metal tube tumbling down a 45-degree slope at 100 miles per hour. Roberto's medical textbooks exploded from his bag. Pages whipped through the cabin like birds. He watched them go, his mind strangely calm, processing that he was about to die. No fear yet, just observation. The fuselage hit something, a rock, a ridge, and the impact threw him against his seatbelt hard enough to crack ribs. Then sliding, the fuselage tobogganed down the mountain on its belly, the metal floor the only thing between them and the slope. Roberto heard people praying in the rows ahead, felt Nando's hand grip his arm. The world outside the windows was white, then white again. The fuselage slowed, stopped. Silence hit harder than the impact. No engines, no wind, just ringing in Roberto's ears and the sound of someone crying. Roberto unbuckled with shaking hands. He was alive. He stood, legs unsteady, and looked around the cabin. Bodies everywhere, some moving, some not. The cockpit was gone, sheared off. Cold air poured through the opening where the nose had been. Snow covered everything. Nando, Roberto said. His voice sounded distant. Nando was slumped in his seat, blood running down his face from a gash on his forehead. But his eyes were open, alive. Roberto moved forward, stumbling over debris. His medical training surfaced through the shock. Check for breathing, check for pulses, prioritize the wounded. He reached the first body and pressed fingers to the neck. Nothing. The next one. Nothing. Third. A pulse, weak but present. Help, someone moaned. Please help. Roberto turned. One of the mothers, Signora Mariani, was trapped under a seat. Her leg bent at an angle that meant broken femur. He knelt beside her, snow soaking through his pants. I'm going to get you out, he said. He lifted the seat. She screamed. He kept lifting until she could drag herself free. Blood soaked her dress. Compound fracture. Bone visible through torn skin. Without antibiotics and surgery, she'd die from infection within days. Roberto looked around the wreckage. 12 bodies weren't moving and never would again. Captain Fairchild crushed in the cockpit, the co-pilot dead beside him. People Roberto had eaten breakfast with that morning, now cooling in the snow. Outside the shattered fuselage, mountains surrounded them in every direction. White peaks against gray sky. No buildings, no roads, no signs of civilization anywhere. Just wilderness and altitude and cold that was already seeping into his bones. They were at least 12,000 feet up, maybe higher. Roberto could feel it in his lungs, each breath unsatisfying, like drowning in air. Nando appeared beside him, blood still dripping from his head wound. "Where are we?" Nando asked. Roberto stared at the mountains. "Nowhere." Roberto counted survivors while there was still light. 29 people alive, though several wouldn't last the night. Signora Mariani with her shattered leg. A crew member with internal bleeding, his abdomen swelling. Nando's mother unconscious, her breathing shallow. Nando's sister Susie barely responsive, her skull fractured. The cold was the immediate problem. They were in summer clothes, light jackets, cotton pants, street shoes. The temperature was already below freezing, and the sun hadn't set yet. Roberto organized the survivors who could walk. Strip the dead of extra clothing. Gather seat cushions for insulation. Close off the gaping hole where the cockpit had been. "Use luggage," Roberto said, pointing to suitcases scattered across the snow. "Stack them in the opening. Anything to block the wind." They worked in a daze, moving like sleepwalkers. Shock did that. Roberto recognized the signs. Pale skin, trembling hands, vacant stares. He felt it himself, but pushed through. Someone had to think clearly. Gustavo Zerbino helped drag luggage to the front. They built a wall of suitcases, coats, and broken seats. It cut the wind. The cabin was maybe 20 feet long now, 8 feet wide, 29 people in that space. "We need to inventory supplies," Roberto said. They found 8 chocolate bars, 3 bottles of wine, a tin of mussels, a few candy bars, some almonds, for 29 people. Roberto did the math. Less than 1 chocolate square per person per day if they rationed carefully. "There's got to be more," Gustavo said. Roberto searched again, found nothing. The cargo hold had torn away with the tail section. Everything they'd packed was scattered across miles of mountain. Water was another issue. Roberto gathered survivors to explain. "Don't eat snow directly. It'll lower your core temperature. We melt it first." He showed them how to use metal from the plane, angling it to catch sunlight, melting snow into a container. Slow work. They'd need gallons per day at this altitude. Alfredo Delgado asked the question everyone was thinking. "How long until they find us?" "Tomorrow," someone said. "They'll send helicopters tomorrow." Roberto wanted to believe that, but he'd seen where they were, miles from any flight path, surrounded by identical white peaks. From the air, the silver fuselage would blend into the snow. Night fell fast. The temperature plummeted. Roberto felt it through every layer he'd scavenged. The wounded moaned. No morphine, no painkillers except a few aspirin tablets. Signora Mariani's broken leg needed setting, but Roberto had nothing. No splints, no bandages, no antiseptic. He used torn fabric to bind her leg to a metal rod from the plane's interior. She screamed when he straightened the bone, passed out from the pain. Maybe better that way. The survivors huddled together for warmth. 29 bodies packed into the fuselage. Roberto ended up near the back, Nando beside him. Around them, people prayed. The sound of the rosary filled the darkness. Nobody slept that first night. The cold penetrated everything. Roberto's feet went numb first, then his hands. He tucked them under his armpits, but it barely helped. Around him, people shivered violently, teeth chattering. The sound echoed off the metal walls. The crew member with internal bleeding died around midnight. Roberto felt for a pulse, found nothing, and told the others. They moved his body outside. No ceremony, no time. 2 more died before dawn, Nando's mother and another passenger. 15 dead now, 27 alive. Nando didn't cry when Roberto told him about his mother. He just stared at the wall, his face blank. Shock, Roberto thought. It would hit later. Dawn came gray and cold. Roberto crawled out first, his legs cramping. The mountains looked exactly the same. Endless white peaks. No smoke from villages. No aircraft contrails. Nothing but rock and snow and silence. They'll search today, Gustavo said. They have to. Roberto nodded but said nothing. He was thinking about search patterns, about how pilots looked for wreckage. The fuselage was white and silver against white snow. From the air, invisible. He organized work parties. One group to improve the shelter, another to melt snow, a third to care for the wounded. Keep people busy. Give them purpose. Roy Harley found a small transistor radio. He fiddled with the dial, picking up static and fragments. Nothing useful until mid-morning when he caught a Chilean news station. The search continues for the Uruguayan aircraft, the announcer said. Poor weather is hampering efforts, but rescue teams remain hopeful. Cheers erupted in the fuselage. They were looking. Help was coming. Roberto allowed himself to hope. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. They just had to survive until then. He rationed the food carefully. 1 square of chocolate per person, a capful of wine, the almonds divided into tiny portions. Everyone complained, but no one refused. Hunger was already setting in, a hollow ache that the meager ration did nothing to fill. The wounded required constant attention. Senora Mariani's fever spiked, infection setting in despite Roberto's attempts to keep the wound clean. Susie Parado remained unconscious, breathing ragged. Another teammate, Arturo Noguera, had a broken leg and possible spinal damage. He couldn't feel his feet. Am I going to walk again? Arturo asked. Roberto didn't know. He lied. Once we get you to a hospital, they'll fix you up. By afternoon, no rescue had come. The clouds thickened. Snow began falling, light at first, then heavier. It covered the ground around the fuselage, making them even less visible. That evening, Roy picked up another broadcast. The search was being expanded. Helicopters and planes were scouring the mountains. The Uruguayan government was demanding maximum effort from Chile and Argentina. Roberto listened and felt the first real fear since the crash. They were searching in the wrong place. Ferradas had radioed their position before impact, but Roberto knew they'd traveled farther than the captain thought. The navigation had been off. They were miles from where rescue teams were looking. He kept this thought to himself. Days 3 and 4 blurred together. The chocolate ran out. The wine was gone. They were down to a few almonds and the tin of mussels. Roberto divided the mussels into 27 microscopic portions. Each person got maybe half a teaspoon. It did nothing for the hunger. People grew weaker. Movement became an effort. Simple tasks exhausted them. Roberto recognized the signs of starvation, the body consuming itself, breaking down muscle for energy. At this altitude, in this cold, they were burning thousands of calories per day and taking in almost nothing. Nando's sister Susie died on day 4. Nando carried her body outside himself. When he came back in, his eyes were empty. Roberto wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. 16 dead now, 26 alive. That night, Roberto stared at the metal ceiling and did math he didn't want to do. Without food, the human body could survive maybe 3 weeks. They were on day 4. They had perhaps 17 days left, and rescue still hadn't come. He thought about the bodies outside, preserved perfectly in the snow, frozen solid within hours. His medical training provided the information clinically. Human tissue was protein, fat, nutrients, everything their bodies desperately needed. The thought made him sick. He pushed it away. On day 5, they heard engines. Everyone scrambled outside, waving and shouting. A plane passed overhead, high up, a silver speck against gray clouds. They screamed themselves hoarse. The plane continued on, not changing course, not circling back. It hadn't seen them. The disappointment crushed morale. Several people broke down crying. Others just stood in the snow, staring at the empty sky. Roberto felt his own hope crumbling, but fought to keep his face neutral. They'll come back, he said. They're searching. That proves it. But he knew the truth. From that altitude, they were invisible. Day 6 brought more snow. Heavy flakes that covered the fuselage. They huddled inside, sharing body heat, too weak to do much else. The hunger was constant now, consuming Roberto's thoughts. He dreamed about food, asado at his family's Sunday dinners, his mother's pasta, fresh bread with butter. He woke to find himself salivating over memories. Roy picked up a broadcast that evening. The announcer's tone had changed. The search was continuing, but conditions were difficult. The implication was clear: hope was fading. After a week in the Andes in winter, survival seemed increasingly unlikely. Roberto looked around at his teammates. Their faces were already gaunt, cheekbones prominent, eyes sunken. They were dying slowly. That night, Gustavo whispered to Roberto in the darkness, "We need to talk about the bodies." "No," Roberto said immediately. "We're going to die without food. We'll be rescued." "When?" Gustavo's voice was gentle but insistent. "How many more days can we last?" Roberto didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. But the thought of eating human flesh, eating his friends, his teammates, was impossible. Unthinkable, wasn't it? He lay awake long after the others slept, the questions circling his mind. Day 7 brought the broadcast they'd been dreading. Roy turned up the radio volume so everyone could hear. The announcer's voice was somber. "After 8 days of intensive search operations, authorities have officially suspended the search for Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. The aircraft is presumed lost with no survivors." The words hung in the air like poison. Someone started sobbing, then another. Within seconds, half the fuselage was crying. Roberto sat frozen, the reality sinking in. No one was looking for them anymore. No helicopters would come. No rescue teams were scanning the mountains. They were on their own. "We're dead," someone said. "They've given up on us." "We're not dead," Roberto heard himself say. "We're alive right now. That's what matters." But even as he spoke, he felt the lie in it. Alive for how much longer? Another week? 2? This story takes time to craft. If you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Day 8 dawned with brutal clarity. Roberto woke to find 2 more people had died during the night. Senora Mariani from infection and another teammate from exposure. 18 dead, 24 alive. The math was simple and terrible. At this rate, they'd all be dead within 2 weeks. He crawled outside to relieve himself, his legs shaking from weakness. The bodies lay in rows near the fuselage, half buried in snow. 18 corpses, friends, teammates, all perfectly preserved in the cold. Roberto stared at them for a long time. His medical training spoke to him in clinical terms. The human body was protein, fat, minerals, everything needed for survival. The cold had frozen the bodies within hours, preventing decomposition. He went back inside without a word. That morning, Gustavo called a meeting. The strongest survivors gathered: Roberto, Nando, Roy, Alfredo, Antonio Vicentin, Carlitos Paez. "We need to make a decision," Gustavo said. "The search is over. No one is coming. We have no food. In a week, maybe 2, we'll be too weak to even consider alternatives." "Alternatives?" Roy repeated. "Say what you mean." "The bodies," Gustavo said. "We have to use the bodies or we die." Silence. Roberto could hear his own heartbeat. "That's insane," Alfredo said. "We can't. It's wrong." "It's survival," Gustavo interrupted. "It's protein. It's the difference between living and dying." Nando spoke up. "My mother is out there. My sister. You're asking me to..." "I'm asking you to live," Gustavo said. "They're dead. We're not. Not yet." Roberto had known this conversation was coming. "I'm a medical student. I understand what we're talking about. Biologically, it's just tissue, protein and fat and nutrients." "It's cannibalism," Roy said. "It's survival," Roberto said. "There's a difference." "What about God?" Alfredo asked. "What about our souls?" Roberto had thought about this during the long night. If God wanted us to die, we'd already be dead. We survived the crash. We survived 8 days. Maybe he kept us alive for a reason. Maybe the bodies are his provision. "We need to vote," Gustavo said. "No," Roberto said. "We don't force this on anyone. Those who can do it, do it. Those who can't, don't. No judgment either way." Nando looked at Roberto. "If we do this, we don't talk about who. We never say whose body we're using." Roberto nodded. That much dignity they could preserve. I'll do it, Gustavo said. I will too, Roberto said. One by one, the others agreed. Not everyone. Some refused absolutely, but enough said yes. Roberto volunteered to go first. He took a piece of broken glass from the cockpit window. His hands shook as he walked outside. The bodies lay in the snow. Roberto chose one of the crew members, someone he hadn't known well. He knelt beside the body, glass in hand, and tried to think clinically. This was a procedure, nothing more. He couldn't do it. His hand froze. Every instinct screamed at him to stop. This was wrong. This was necessary. Roberto closed his eyes and said a prayer. Then he made the first cut. The flesh was frozen solid. The glass barely penetrated. He had to saw back and forth, applying pressure. It took minutes to cut free a small strip of muscle from the leg. His stomach churned. He stood holding the piece of flesh. It was maybe 2 inches long, half an inch thick, dark red, frozen hard. He walked back to the fuselage. We need to thaw it, he said, and clean it. They melted snow in a metal container. Roberto placed the flesh in the water, watched it soften. The water turned pink. When he pulled it out, it looked less like part of a person. He held it up. Who's first? Silence. Roberto realized that for all their agreement, no one wanted to actually do it. I'll go, he said. He put the piece in his mouth, chewed. The texture was tough, stringy. The taste was metallic. His stomach convulsed. He forced himself to swallow. Instead of revulsion, he felt his body respond. Protein. His system recognized what it needed. It's done, he said. I'm still human. Nothing changed except now I have a chance to live. Gustavo went next, then Antonio, then Carlitos. One by one, those who'd agreed took small pieces. Some vomited immediately. Others kept it down. Everyone who participated looked haunted. Those who'd refused watched silently. No one judged them. That night, they held a service, prayed together. Father Carlos led them. We are not sinner, he said. We are survivors. The dead have given us life. We honor them by living. Over the next days, they developed a system, a rotation of who would harvest. They worked in pairs, never alone. They prayed before and after. They never used bodies of close family members. They never discussed who the source was. The food made a difference. Strength returned slowly. People could move without exhaustion. The wounded began to heal, but the psychological cost was steep. Some survivors withdrew into themselves. Others developed rituals, excessive prayers, compulsive cleaning, anything to maintain humanity. On day 17, an avalanche hit the fuselage at midnight. Roberto woke to suffocation. Snow poured through gaps in their wall, filling the cabin in seconds. Total darkness, no air. He couldn't tell which way was up. His lungs burned. He clawed at the snow. His hand broke through to air and he gasped. Around him, muffled screams. People dying in the dark. Dig! Roberto shouted. Everyone dig toward my voice. He pulled himself up through the snow, reached down and grabbed the first hand he found. Pulled. Gustavo emerged, coughing. Together they dug for others. The work was frantic. Every second mattered. Roberto's fingers went numb, but he kept digging. Found Roy, unconscious but alive. Found Carlitos, trapped under a seat. Found Antonio, with his face blue. They worked for an hour. Finally, they'd pulled everyone they could reach to the surface. 8 people didn't respond. 8 more dead in a single night. Roberto counted the living. 16 left. The avalanche had filled the fuselage completely. They couldn't go back inside. For the rest of the night, they huddled on top of the snow in sub-zero temperatures with no shelter. But dawn came. They'd survived again. Nando was different after the avalanche. That morning, he pulled Roberto aside. We have to get out of here, Nando said. No more waiting. We walk out or we die. Walk where? Roberto asked. We're surrounded by mountains. West, Nando said. Toward Chile. We climb over the mountains and find help. That's impossible. We'd need climbing gear, proper clothing. We make it, Nando interrupted. We use seat cushions for snowshoes. We sew insulation into sleeping bags. We pack enough food to last 10 days. Food. He meant flesh from the bodies. Roberto looked at the mountains. The idea was insane. But staying here was death too. "Who goes?" Roberto asked. "You and me," Nando said. "Maybe one or two others. The strongest." "We'd need weeks to prepare," Roberto said. "Build up our strength. Make equipment." "So we start now," Nando said. They spent the next days planning, told the others what they intended. Some thought it was suicide. Others saw it as their only chance. Roberto and Nando began training, climbing nearby slopes. The altitude made every step agony. They experimented with equipment, fashioned crude snowshoes from seat cushions and wire, sewed insulation material into a sleeping bag, made backpacks from seat covers, packed provisions, dried strips of flesh wrapped in cloth. Antonio Vicentin volunteered to join them. By day 35, they were ready. The survivors gathered to see them off. Roberto looked at their faces, gaunt, bearded, aged beyond their years. 2 weeks, Roberto promised. "If we're not back in 2 weeks with rescue, we made it out or died trying." The preparations took longer than expected. Roberto's first attempt at snowshoes fell apart after 10 steps. The wire cut through the seat cushion fabric. They needed stronger binding. Gustavo suggested using strips of leather from the plain seats. That worked better. They tested everything on short climbs. The sleeping bag leaked cold air through gaps in the seams. Roberto spent 2 days restitching it with wire, his fingers bleeding from the work. Nando crafted a crude pair of sunglasses from plastic and cardboard to prevent snow blindness. Without them, the reflected sunlight at this altitude would burn their retinas within hours. The biggest challenge was the provisions. They needed enough food for 3 men for at least 10 days. Maybe more if they got lost or the terrain proved worse than expected. That meant harvesting and preparing large quantities of flesh. The work was grim and methodical. They cut thin strips, laid them on metal sheets in the sun to dry. The dried meat was lighter, easier to pack, and wouldn't freeze solid at altitude. Roberto watched his hands perform these tasks and felt disconnected from his own body. This wasn't him, couldn't be him, but it was. He'd become someone who could cut flesh from the dead and pack it like jerky for a hiking trip. During this time, they also scouted routes. Roberto and Nando climbed the nearest peak, a brutal 5-hour ascent that left them gasping and dizzy. From the summit, they surveyed their prison. Mountains everywhere. But to the west, far in the distance, Roberto spotted what looked like a valley. Green, or maybe he imagined it. That was their target. "How far?" Nando asked. Roberto tried to estimate. The clarity of the mountain air made distances deceptive. 50 miles, maybe more. "Through that terrain," Nando pointed at the jagged peaks between them and the valley. "Through that terrain," Roberto confirmed. They descended in silence, both men processing what they'd seen. The journey would be harder than Roberto had allowed himself to believe. They'd be climbing in street shoes with improvised equipment at altitudes where the air held half the oxygen of sea level. The odds of success were minimal, but the odds of survival if they stayed were 0. They left at dawn on December 11th, day 60 of their ordeal. Roberto wore 3 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, and a jacket made from seat covers. His pack weighed maybe 30 pounds. The sleeping bag, provisions, a water bottle fashioned from a wine sack. On his feet, the crude snowshoes made each step awkward and clumsy. The first day nearly killed them. They climbed east, away from the fuselage, toward the ridgeline they'd scouted. The altitude made breathing torture. Roberto counted steps to distract himself from the burning in his lungs. 10 steps. Rest. 10 more steps. Rest. His heart hammered against his ribs. Beside him, Nando and Antonio struggled equally. By noon, they'd covered maybe 2 miles and climbed 1,000 feet. Roberto's legs shook from exhaustion. They stopped to rest and eat. He pulled out a strip of dried meat, forced himself to chew and swallow. "How much further to the ridge?" Antonio asked. Roberto looked up. The ridgeline seemed no closer than at dawn. "Another 1,000 feet, maybe 2. They didn't reach it that day. As the sun set, they were still on the slope, exposed to wind that cut through their improvised clothing. They huddled together in the sleeping bag, all 3 men pressed against each other for warmth. Roberto didn't sleep. The cold was too intense. Day 2 was worse. They summited the ridge only to see what Roberto had feared. The valley was much farther than he'd thought. Beyond this ridge lay another, and another beyond that. Mountains stacked to the horizon. "We keep going," Nando said. They descended into a valley, then climbed the next ridge. The work was brutal. Roberto's snowshoes kept breaking, the binding coming loose. He'd stopped to repair them, fingers numb and clumsy, while Nando and Antonio waited. On day 3, they found the tail section of the plane. It lay in a snowfield 2 miles from the fuselage, relatively intact. Roberto pried open the baggage compartment with shaking hands, found suitcases, clothing, warm jackets, and proper shoes. Better yet, batteries. The aircraft's batteries might work with the radio back at the fuselage. If they could get them back, if Roy could wire them correctly, they might be able to call for help. "We take what we can carry," Roberto said. "Come back for the rest." They stuffed their packs with warm clothing and 1 battery, spent the night in the tail section, actually warm for the first time in 2 months. He woke to Nando shaking him. "Storm coming. We need to move." Roberto looked outside. Dark clouds massed to the west, moving fast. They climbed through deteriorating conditions. Snow began falling by mid-morning. By noon, it was a full blizzard. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. Roberto lost sight of Antonio, called out, heard a faint reply from the wrong direction. They were getting separated in whiteout conditions at 13,000 feet. Roberto dropped his pack and tied one end of a rope to it, held the other end and moved toward Antonio's voice. The wind tore at him, snow stinging his exposed skin. He found Antonio after 20 feet. "Grab the rope!" Roberto shouted over the wind. "Don't let go!" They pulled themselves back to the pack, found Nando crouched beside it, already building a snow wall for shelter. They couldn't keep moving in this. They'd walk in circles until exhaustion dropped them. The 3 men dug into the snow, creating a shallow pit. Used their packs to block the wind, crawled into the sleeping bag together, soaked and shivering. The bag was designed for 2 people. 3 was a tight, miserable fit, but the body heat kept them from freezing. The storm lasted 36 hours. Roberto lay in the bag, unable to move, growing weaker. They had no way to melt snow for water, no fire, no shelter beyond what they'd scraped together. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his thoughts fragmenting. When the storm finally broke, Roberto could barely stand. His legs had cramped from being still so long. Antonio was worse. His feet had gotten wet and started to freeze. Roberto examined them, pressing on the toes. Antonio screamed. "Frostbite," Roberto said. "Bad." "Can I walk?" Antonio asked. "You have to." They ate the last of their provisions that morning. The storm had cost them a day and a half, burning through supplies while they lay immobile. Roberto did the math. They'd been gone 5 days, had food for maybe 3 more. The valley still looked impossibly far. "We need to make a decision," Roberto said. He looked at Antonio's feet, at their depleted supplies. 3 of us won't make it, but 2 might." Antonio understood immediately. "You're sending me back." "You can't walk on those feet," Roberto said. "Not the distance we need to cover, and 2 of us will move faster." "I failed you," Antonio said. "You got us this far," Nando said. "That's not failure." They gave Antonio half the remaining food and clearer directions back to the fuselage. Watched him limp away through the snow, a solitary figure growing smaller. Roberto and Nando continued west, just the 2 of them now. The mountains seemed endless. Every ridge they climbed revealed another beyond it. Roberto's body was failing. His feet were numb. His fingers wouldn't close properly. He fell repeatedly, getting up slower each time. On day 7, they climbed what Roberto was certain had to be the final ridge. His lungs burned. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. He used his hands to pull himself up the last 100 feet, crawling through the snow. Reached the summit, looked west. More mountains, higher ones. The peaks stretched to the horizon, white and insurmountable. Roberto felt something break inside him. They couldn't do this. The distance was too far. They were going to die out here, frozen and alone, having abandoned the others for nothing. Nando pulled himself up beside Roberto, looked at the view, didn't speak for a long time. "We keep going," Nando finally said. "We can't." "We keep going," Nando repeated, "until we make it or we die. Those are the only options." They descended the western slope. Roberto's brain had stopped processing the impossibility. He just moved, one foot forward, then the other. Repeat until he collapsed or reached salvation. Day 8, day 9. The mountains began to change. The snow thinned. Rocks appeared, then patches of bare earth. Roberto saw the first plant he'd seen in 2 months, a tiny shrub clinging to a stone. The altitude dropped. Breathing became easier. Roberto's mind cleared slightly from the hypoxic fog. With clarity came fresh awareness of how broken his body was. His feet were destroyed. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His face was burned raw. But they were losing altitude. That meant they were getting somewhere. On day 10, they heard water. Not the trickle of snowmelt. Real water. A stream rushing over rocks. They followed the sound and found it. A river maybe 10 feet wide, flowing fast through a rocky canyon. "Rivers flow to civilization," Roberto said. "We follow this downstream." The river led them through a narrowing valley. The walls rose high on both sides, but ahead Roberto saw green. Actual green. Grass, trees. They walked through that day and into the night, following the river by moonlight. Roberto's body moved on autopilot. Dawn of day 11 brought a smell Roberto had forgotten existed. Smoke. Wood smoke from a fire. They rounded a bend in the river and saw it. A small hut on the opposite bank. A shelter for ranchers, rough but solid. And outside it, 3 men on horseback. Roberto tried to shout, but his voice wouldn't work. Nando waved his arms. The river was too loud. The horsemen couldn't hear them. One of the riders looked their way, pointed. The 3 men stared across the river at Roberto and Nando. Roberto saw the shock on their faces. 2 walking corpses emerging from the mountains. The riders couldn't cross. The river was too deep. One of them, an older man, made gestures. "Wait, I'll get help." But another rancher took a piece of paper and a pencil, wrapped them in a plastic bag, tied the bag to a stone, and threw it across the river. It landed at Roberto's feet. Roberto's hands shook so badly he could barely unwrap the paper. He found the pencil, tried to think what to write. Everything he needed to say had to fit on one small page. He wrote, "I come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. I am from Uruguay. We have been walking for 10 days. In the plane, there are still 14 people injured. We have to get out of here quickly. We have no food. We are weak. When are you going to come to fetch us? Where are we?" He tied the note to the stone and threw it back. The rancher read it, looked up at Roberto and Nando, nodded, mounted his horse and rode away at a gallop. Roberto collapsed on the riverbank. They'd done it. After 72 days, after losing 29 friends, they'd found help. The rancher who stayed behind gestured to them. He couldn't cross, but he could help. He disappeared into the hut and came back with food. Bread, cheese, an apple. He wrapped them in cloth, tied them to another stone, and threw the bundle across. Roberto caught it. Unwrapped the food with trembling hands. The bread was still warm. He bit into it, and his body responded with desperate hunger. He forced himself to eat slowly. After 2 months of starvation, too much food too fast could kill him. Nando ate beside him, both men sitting on the riverbank, waiting. The rancher on the other side built a fire, made mate tea and showed it to them, miming drinking. A simple gesture of humanity that made Roberto want to weep. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Roberto dozed in the warmth, the first time he'd felt truly warm since October. When he woke, more people had arrived on the opposite bank. A woman, 2 children. They stared at Roberto and Nando like they were ghosts. Then Roberto heard it, the sound of engines. A truck appeared on the far side, then another. Men jumped out, officials in uniforms, a doctor with a medical bag. One of them shouted across the river in Spanish, "We're coming to get you. Police are bringing rope." Ha! The rancher who stayed behind gestured to them. He couldn't cross, but he could help. He disappeared into the hut and came back with food. Bread, cheese, an apple. He wrapped them in cloth, tied them to another stone, and threw the bundle across. Roberto caught it. unwrapped the food with trembling hands. The bread was still warm. He bit into it, and his body responded with desperate hunger. He forced himself to eat slowly. After 2 months of starvation, too much food too fast could kill him. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Roberto dozed in the warmth, the first time he'd felt truly warm since October. When he woke, more people had arrived on the opposite bank. They stared at Roberto and Nando like they were ghosts. Then Roberto heard engines. A truck appeared on the far side. Men jumped out, officials in uniforms, a doctor with a medical bag. One of them shouted across the river in Spanish, "We're coming to get you. Police are bringing rope." Within an hour, they'd rigged a line across the river. A man crossed hand over hand and reached their side, soaking wet but grinning. He was a Chilean police officer. "You're the Uruguayans," he said, "from the plane. Everyone thinks you're dead." "Not everyone," Roberto said. They rigged a harness and pulled Roberto across the river first. Hands grabbed him on the other side and hauled him onto the bank. Someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. The doctor knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "Hospital," the doctor said. "You need immediate care." "The others first," Roberto said. "There are 14 people still in the mountains. You have to get them out." "Where?" the police commander asked. He had a map spread on the hood of a truck. Roberto studied it, trying to orient himself. "Here," he said, pointing. "Maybe 10 miles from the Argentine border. High altitude, you'll need helicopters." "We'll organize a rescue immediately," the commander said. They pulled Nando across next. He collapsed when he reached the far bank. They loaded both men into a truck. Roberto watched the mountains recede through the rear window. 72 days he'd been in those peaks. Now they were behind him, but 14 people were still up there, waiting. The truck took them to Los Maitanes. People lined the streets, staring. The truck stopped at a medical clinic. The doctor rushed them inside, started IVs, began treatment for severe malnutrition, dehydration, and frostbite. Roberto lay on a clean bed with white sheets. The sensation was surreal. His mind kept returning to the fuselage, to the 14 people huddled in the wreckage, wondering if help would come. A Chilean Air Force officer arrived that evening, Commander Jorge Massa, in charge of the rescue operation. He sat beside Roberto's bed with maps. "We need exact coordinates," Massa said. "The weather window is narrow. We have maybe 48 hours before another storm." Roberto described the location in detail: the glacier, the mountain peaks, the orientation of the fuselage. Massa took notes, tried to plot it on his map. December 21st dawned clear and cold. Roberto woke to the sound of helicopter rotors. He pulled himself to the window and saw 3 Chilean Air Force helicopters lifting off. The rescue was happening. He wanted to go with them, but the doctor had forbidden it. Roberto's body was too damaged, so he stayed behind and waited, pacing the hospital room. Hours passed. The helicopters had launched at dawn. They should be back by mid-morning. Mid-morning came and went. No helicopters. Roberto felt panic rising. Had they crashed? Had the weather turned? Then just after noon, he heard the rotors again. 3 helicopters approaching. They landed in the field. Doors opened. People emerged, alive, walking. Roberto recognized Gustavo, then Roy, then Carlitos. They looked skeletal, bearded, but they were alive. Roberto ran from the hospital room, burst outside. The survivors saw him and started shouting. They met in the middle of the field in a collision of embraces and tears. "You did it," Gustavo said, gripping Roberto's shoulders. "We all did it," Roberto said. But only 6 survivors had arrived on this flight. The helicopters had weight limits at high altitude. They'd taken the strongest first. "The others?" Roberto asked. "Still at the crash site," Roy said. "The pilots promised they'd come back today." Roberto watched the helicopters refuel. Commander Massa approached. "We have a problem," Massa said. "Weather's deteriorating faster than forecast. The second group needs evacuation now or they'll be stuck for days." "Then go now," Roberto said. "We're trying. But the altitude, the winds, we're at the edge of what these helicopters can handle." Roberto looked at the mountains. Somewhere up there, 8 people were waiting. They couldn't be abandoned now. "You have to try," Roberto said. "They've survived this long." Massa nodded. "We'll go. But if the weather turns bad, We won't make it back tonight. The helicopters took off again. Roberto watched them disappear. The sun was already low. In a few hours, it would be dark. The wait was agony. Roberto sat with the 6 survivors who'd been rescued, listening to their stories. The avalanche, the weeks of waiting, the growing certainty that rescue would never come. "We heard the helicopter rotors this morning," Carlito said. "Thought we were hallucinating. Then we saw them landing. I don't think I've ever cried that hard." The sun touched the mountains when Roberto heard the rotors again. 3 helicopters appeared from the peaks. They landed, and the last 8 survivors climbed out. Everyone was accounted for. All 16 who'd been alive when Roberto and Nando left were now safe. Roberto embraced each one. These men had become his brothers in a way no one else could understand. That night, they gathered in a hotel in San Fernando. 16 skeletal men sitting in a clean room with real beds and hot food. It felt like a dream. Someone asked the question they'd all been avoiding. What do we tell people about how we survived? Silence. The world would want to know how they lasted 72 days without food. The truth would horrify people. "We tell the truth," Roberto said. "All of it. What we did, why we did it." "People will hate us," Roy said. "Some will," Gustavo agreed. "But we know the truth. We did what we had to do. The dead would have wanted us to live." They agreed unanimously. Tomorrow they'd face the world. December 23rd brought the press conference. Reporters from around the world packed into a room in Santiago. Roberto sat at a table with Nando and the other survivors, facing the crowd. The question started gentle. How did they survive the crash? How did they stay warm? Roberto answered clinically. Then the question came. A reporter from Argentina. "You were in the mountains for 72 days with no food supplies. How did you survive?" Roberto took a breath. "We ate the flesh of those who died. We had no choice. It was that or die ourselves." The room exploded, reporters shouting, cameras flashing. Roberto sat calmly and let them react. When the noise died, he continued. "We're not proud of what we did, but we're not ashamed either. We honored the dead by surviving. They gave us life. Every day we live from now on, we live for them." The questions continued for hours. Some reporters were sympathetic, others accusatory. Roberto answered everything honestly, described the decision-making, the prayers, the respect they tried to maintain. One reporter asked if he had any regrets. Roberto thought about it. "I regret that we crashed. I regret that 29 people died. I regret that we were put in that position. But do I regret choosing to live? No, never." The story went global within hours. Headlines screamed about cannibalism in the Andes. Some called them heroes, others called them savages. Religious leaders debated the morality. Everyone had an opinion, but the Catholic Church issued a statement. The Vatican said what they'd done was not a sin. They'd acted out of necessity. God understood. The dead had provided for the living. Roberto read the statement and felt a weight lift. He'd carried the guilt for 72 days. Now someone with authority said he wasn't a monster, just a survivor. The funerals came next. 29 services in Montevideo over weeks. Roberto attended everyone, stood before families and explained what had happened. Some families embraced him, others couldn't look at him. He understood both reactions. Years passed. Roberto finished medical school, became a pediatric cardiologist, saved thousands of children's lives over his career. Nando built a successful business. The other survivors lived full lives, married, had children, pursued careers. They stayed close, met regularly. The bond forged in the Andes never broke. They were the only ones who truly understood what they'd endured and what they'd become. 50 years after the crash, Roberto returned to the mountain. He was 70 now, his body aged but his mind sharp. He stood at the crash site with the few surviving members of the original 16. A cross marked the spot where the fuselage had been. Roberto placed flowers at the base of the cross, spoke to the dead one last time. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. We lived the lives you couldn't. We made them count." He walked away from the memorial, surrounded by his brothers. The mountain remained eternal and indifferent, but they'd beaten it, survived it, became more than victims of a crash. They became proof that humans can endure anything when they choose to live. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and share it. It helps the next person find their way here.